Hey everyone again, I'm David White, a senior postdoctoral researcher with the Sustainability Institute here at UCC, and we're here with our four panellists, our four residency hosts from our TIDAL Arts project. It's an ocean science, art science collaboration around Europe, where we're going to have 20 artist projects that have recently been funded around the continent, and we have an upcoming call for 4 residencies in 4 distinct locations, very beautiful, very amazing locations around Europe. So we're going to ask the hosts some questions now about their experiences of residencies in general, and maybe following on from this morning. So I'll begin, and then after a couple of questions or a couple of minutes, we can reopen the floor again, because I think there was quite a few coming in. So one I wanted to start with, after listening to you this morning, is it struck me that all 4 of your residencies take place on islands in some way, like better or worse connected to like the mainland, in inverted commas. But I just was wondering, I thought that was interesting, and I thought we might kind of start with that, considering TIDAL Arts is an ocean and water interested project. And maybe you could describe, what is it about islands and maybe the tension between being peripheral but then always being connected through the water body that makes it, they're good places to think through science and arts, perhaps. So maybe I'll start with you, Taru.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Taru Elfving from CAA Contemporary Arts Archipelago in Turku Archipelago in Finland, in the Baltic Sea. And why islands? I guess islands are the island that specifically I've been working with recently, but islands more generally as well, are this sort of what you said about periphery and the center. What I found really interesting historically is that it's very recent that islands were not seen as very central because they were so well connected compared to more landlocked places, for example, further away from the waterways. And so I think that kind of mentality of being kind of actually very connected to the world is something very specific. The things kind of, there's always been these flows coming and going from islands. And even when they are quite remote geographically, there's always been a sense of connectedness in a different way, maybe than further inland or away from waterways.
Hello, I'm Attila Toth, underwater archaeologist from Árpád Museum, Hungary. I'm working with river islands, and I think river islands are important and interesting because they have borders, clear borders. In inland areas, it was very important that something have a border. The other thing that they have all water access. Water access in history was very important because drinking water for people, for animals, industrial water, water energy was very essential. Crossing the waters, again, islands are special places. Imagine that for example, in the center of Rome, there is the Isola Tiberiana, where the oldest stone bridge, Roman stone bridge, was built. And it was close to Forum Boarium, which is the coal market. So you can imagine that it was an important place in cross-river and along-river connection. And this is true for other cities like Paris, for example, Budapest, and you may list other important towns and cities. One more thing, that islands, river islands, has a special microclimate. For example, it's very important for fruits. In our temporal climate, the early spring freeze are very important to destroy the fruits. And the special mild microclimate of the islands could save, and we have historical notes that on small Danube islands you may find very often fruit gardens, for example. One more historical addition, monasteries are very often were built on island or collected lands on island, because islands were isolated, somehow sacral spaces, and due to this economical and other importance, they could collect taxes and other incomes. So islands are special places right in river basin.
Just for the some people online are saying it's quite hard to hear, so this mic is just for our recording here. We're still using this one, just so speak up and clearly if you can, please. Thank you.
Hello, I am Benedetta D'Ettorre from TBA 21 Academy. So I guess our residency will be based in Venice, Italy, and I think worldwide Venice is very famous for being on an island. And what is really interesting, though, I think, is the symbiotic relationship with the wider lagoon as well. So it's not just an island, but the ecosystem is quite diverse, actually, from north to south. We do have salt marshes as well, the connection to the sea. Recently, we've been also in conversation with some scientists working on the rivers that were diverted to actually maintain the ecosystem as it is at the moment in the lagoon. And when I say at the moment, I mean for the last 600 years. So the historical symbiotic relationship between art and science, I think, is embedded in what Venice is, used to be, and will be in the future. So something that we talk about a lot as well is Venice kind of being a testing ground for adaptation, and has been for centuries. And it allows us to study what's going to happen now with coastal cities, sea level rise, but different methodologies as well to think alternatively, maybe through arts and creative approaches around the ecosystem and our constant exchanges with it. So, I think Jesse.
Yeah, so Jesse online, if you want to add anything to that.
Sorry. It's a very interesting question in the sense that we've also been trying to answer it throughout the years. When it comes to the Azores as an archipelago, as a place, it has been contaminated by these ideas of passage, of encounter, but also friction. And we can think of this in a geological point of view, like with the tectonic plates, continents, and the world. But it's also within these transatlantic crossings to military and scientific infrastructures that were built in the islands throughout its settlement by the Portuguese, but also by other countries. But then also from like a spiritual and even the agricultural practices that shape the island. And so this territory carries profound geological, political, and cultural marks. So I think all of these things together help us also understand the idiosyncrasies of the place and how can we recognize them and how can we also work with them. In the research for the biennial this year, we arrived to the word ecotone, which are the zones of contact and transition between different ecosystems. So we were also using it in a more broader symbolic way of like trying to also think of the islands as this place where, you know, living and non-living interchange, and where also these, as volcanic islands, where these boundaries between geos and bios become a bit more porous. And so I think all of these things together, and I think also because of the projects that we've been doing, and also because of, as my colleagues were sharing, I think there's a lot of changes in the perceptions that we have towards also these notions of center and periphery. I think they've changed a lot in the past few years, and they encompass much more things at this point. I think for us in the Azores, we went through and still are in this process of ourselves of resignifying what this periphery means and how we can work from it. So I think now more and more it's looking at the islands not as peripheries or isolated territories, which is something like very sometimes embedded in the like traditional narratives of the Azores, that many of them fabricated during the dictatorship. But to like leave that behind and really start looking at them as laboratories where one can look at these other forms of cultural, social, and ecological production. So it's thinking of this insular condition as, or these forces in that stem from the island to help us negotiate, because we're a lot of times put these limited, that's the truth in, at least in our archipelago, with limited resources. There's a long distance towards the two continents, Europe and North America. There's, of course, a lot of issues around the ecosystems and their own fragility. Yet, at the same time, these conditions also generate a lot of practices and a lot of knowledge that rely on resilience in cooperation but also in imagination. I would say that in the Azores, we're very suspicious in one hand, but then we're also very curious. And that also allows to have a space of imagination as an important ground to then understand how we can contribute to like a global culture and to these global narratives. So I think, again, projects like TIDAL, it allows us, institutions working from these peripheral contexts, but also those who are there working or in movement through the islands, also to perceive these new dynamics that exist between territories that are more and more, at least for us, trans-regional.
Great, thanks, Jesse. Dorka, I actually just wanted to ask you a question as well. So obviously we're here today in University College Cork in Ireland, which is a university, and the specific partners that are involved in tidal arts from UCC are from a marine and energy research centre. But you come from a cultural non-profit in Hungary. And so I just wanted to ask you about your experience of, from our side, we've definitely seen more, funding and research funding from the European level, say, going towards this kind of transdisciplinary work or, work that links science and policy or arts and science. And so have you noticed that like the kind of projects that you guys have been getting involved in over the last few years also kind of reflects that experience, the kind of change in what's being funded?
Thank you, Dave. Hi, my name is Dorka Gadus. I'm from Pro Progressione in Budapest. Yes, definitely. I think in terms of contemporary art, interdisciplinary projects are usually come from EU-funded projects, because I would say contemporary artists, if they are as, well positioned in their field, they usually like to work alone. And groups are usually are coming from places where they are not that supported, so definitely. And sustainability has been going hand in hand with most of the newer projects nowadays, and most of our projects focus on some form of sustainability. It might not be environmental sustainability, but a lot of interdisciplinary projects and a lot of groups, I feel like, and these projects open up this huge network of artists that are like connecting to each other, forming new groups and inspiring each other, which is very lovely.
Great, thanks very much for that. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to ask about also came up quite strongly from your presentations of your own work and your own experience this morning, was some idea around purpose in your work, or advocacy, or say impact, that the arts or the residencies that generally come to your institutions have some idea of this, of a change that they're trying to make. So again, I suppose, how do you see maybe your specific institute as kind of supporting that? What's the specific kinds of causes or work that you like to get involved in or are generally connected to? And how do you see the role of arts residencies in doing something like that, affecting like policy change or thinking about environmental change or whatever it may be?
I think residencies are still one of the very few spaces or support structures for artists and researchers to actually not have to produce anything. And I would say that also produce impact directly in a way, that this kind of time and space to actually really work with the complexities, to maybe rethink your own methods and practice, and also to develop new kinds of collaborations or new kinds of research questions or new kinds of approaches is really, really critical. And I think these are kind of, it's really important to guard the residencies also kind of in that way, because I think the kind of impact can be so many different things that can come out of this. So when there is a possibility to really take time to kind of work with a specific research questions or with a place or with other disciplines, for example, without that kind of predetermined outcome and timeline, this can have so many kind of really longer term and very in-depth impacts that I think is really, really important to recognize. So I would really advocate for residencies still to have that kind of open-endedness in them. And so that's kind of one really crucial thing that I think residencies can bring also for transdisciplinarity and for kind of art-science collaborations, that they can be these sort of spaces where you don't have to already have in mind that this will become a kind of, this will have a scientific output, or this will have an artistic, exhibition or something coming out of this. But to kind of really develop something where actually these forms of output can take, kind of develop out of it. And then it can really have a really kind of broad kind of impact. It can allow artists, also researchers, scientists, whoever we're collaborating with, to also kind of really discover new questions, try out, experiment in ways that I know that in academia, the same as in the arts, we have less and less time really and support for actually experimentation and taking risks. And so I think these are kind of really, really critical in this, what residencies can offer. And so maybe that's another kind of understanding of an island, to kind of create, in a way, to inhabit maybe an island, also in a kind of mental sort of space, where you can detach yourself for a moment, retreat from this sort of constant state of pressures of production and state of emergency, even when we're working with really urgent societal and ecological questions. That's kind of sometimes, also these really kind of concrete islands are very good for this, to creating this sort of mental space.
Very interesting.
Thank you. And I'm very happy that I'm not the first to answer this question, because I had some time. For us, I think it's a multi-layered question or answer, because local community is very proud of its cultural and natural heritage and its history. And at Ráckeve, there is a special tradition to host artists. But in these days, we don't have a highly appreciated international level artist. So for the community, it's a good possibility to show an internationally ranked artistic person, to advertise or at least let to know or let to use the rich heritage of this island in one hand. For them, it could build up some kind of identity or strengthen the local identity, and could help to advertise the town, because the town is very proud and would be open to tourism, but the tourists are not coming because we are not very well advertised. So this is one layer. The other layer, from the part of the museum or from the part of archaeological science, it's a good chance to open new fields to cooperate, because we are very open for international cooperation, but also for interdisciplinary. And this interdisciplinarity doesn't mean only that we cooperate with computer science or geographical science and so on, but could be open for art to ask new questions, new views of an artist which we couldn't observe, because good observation could come that after someone asks the good question, the right question, you identify, okay, it's a good question. I don't understand why I didn't mind this before. But it could happen that an international artist with a different view, but focusing in our heritage, our problems, could identify a new point of view which could help us to understand our heritage in one way. On the other hand, could help us to explain the richness and importance of our heritage, which is evident for us, but not known for the whole world. And the artist could help us to communicate this.
I totally echo what Taru was saying in terms of guarding the time and the space of the artist, and that being important, so valuing really the process. Because I'm thinking, for example, with the last residencies that I was presenting you still on water and the ports, they were also part of a European project. And I feel like sometimes they can be quite demanding on the artist. So really it's responsibility of the curatorial team. And I was really lucky to have been working with a very experienced curator on this project. Sorry. That was really clever in managing the relationship with the artist and connecting them to the local context in a way that really left a lot of space for freedom. And as an institution, as a project manager myself and producer on the residency, part of the role, as we were saying earlier, was about navigating different expectations between the art itself, the science, but also the funders. So I think that's the most important part, really.
Great, thank you. Jesse, do you have anything to add to that question before we move on?
Yes, I think, again, when we think of purpose and advocacy, they have to be, or at least for us, they are very embedded in the practice. And I think the institution was created as a response to the lack of cultural infrastructures in the Azores. So both the biennial Walk and Talk as Vaga, they have grown as spaces on their own of advocacy for the right to create and access contemporary art from, again, a peripheral territory. And I think this purpose is a twofold. On one hand, it aims to support artists in developing new work and connecting them with these local communities and others. But on the other, I think it's also about shifting the perception of what it means to live and to create from an island context. So I think this advocacy is not only about representation or production or even process. I think it's also a lot about insisting that these peripheral geographies, they can also produce knowledge and they can also be centers for cultural innovation. I think that for us has always been very important, is to change also, especially in a country or in a context like Portugal, where everything is so Lisbon centric, and the perception of what is good or what is well produced is always associated to these centers, to how to work and to advocate for these other spaces. So I think, and also through the biennial, I think it's also advocating of these, what can be these other models of production, which we're rehearsing. So a lot of times they fail or they don't really accomplish a lot of their initial goals or aims. But as my colleagues were saying, it's also understanding the role of residencies and these spaces and the importance that they have towards process and research and rehearsing, which I think is quite important in this moment, especially in the context of the Azores, but also in a global context, of course, of how it can be also responsive to ecological and social urgencies. So yes, I think that's it.
Great, thanks, Jesse. I've got one more question. Maybe Dorka, if you have any, you can ask then. Do you want one now? Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so you guys were talking, I thought about what Attila said, that this question has so many layers, and also what is art? Art is this only the product that was created at the end? Is it the whole process? I think these questions are very important to ask, and I think if you look at art as this whole living, breathing thing that has so many little layers to it, then I definitely think this can be an influence, because it can influence another community to find an artist. It can influence local policymakers to, initiate a project like this. So I definitely think that these projects and these artistic expressions have the power to influence, but it's not just the actual artwork or the actual artist, but the whole process that we have to concentrate on.
Great. That idea of the process sets up my next question quite well, so thank you. So I wanted to ask, this is kind of related to impact as well. I come from an anthropology background, and we have this idea in anthropology of parachute ethnography, when a researcher goes in, kind of extracts information, doesn't get to know the community as well as they should, and leaves and has a great career, and either nothing happens to the community, or in the worst situations that information could become damaging in some way. So anyway, I wanted to ask, in that kind of leading on from the impact and thinking about the process, is one thing that we're very keen on in TIDAL Arts, is that not just kind of an art-science collaboration is put together and new knowledge is created, but a community is kind of involved and positively affected in some way. So maybe if just one or two of you wanted to say, I saw in a lot of your presentations community engagement, or Attila, you talked about the kind of the pride of the local community in its place. So yeah, if there's any examples of how to do that well, to kind of to run a residency so that it does positively affect a community, or that they feel like they've gained something from being involved in it. Or if anyone has an example of a project that's done that particularly well, anything like that. Do you want to go?
There's within the arts, we're also quite aware of the residency fatigue. That is very similar to this parachuting kind of researcher who comes and extracts, and there has been really this sort of like, when you have residencies in for example in sort of small communities where the residents come, new one comes every month, and then wants to engage with local knowledge and so on, and this can be obviously super extractive, but also in a sense of them wanting to engage with the community and give something back to the community can be also quite exhausting for the local community. So I think this sort of a subtle, this kind of, how do we work in a sustainable way in different places, and what kind of time frames does this take, for what kind of commitments and mediations and so on, and processes, and so I think this is really critical. And on the kind of island where I'm working specifically across the whole archipelago, but in this one island we don't really have a local community. It's an island with only researchers now, but the researchers are also the question of like this was really kind of from early on when we started working with the research station, the question of how can we, because it's a very kind of intense environment as well, isolated on an island, and the scientists are working under more and more pressure also from timelines and short-term funding and so on. We can't expect them to be there available for us, for kind of sharing their knowledge and so on. And so the kind of small steps, kind of slower process of really finding ways of working that really makes sense for both parties has been really crucial. But then also thinking about the impact and where and how, for example, the artwork that might grow out of this, where and how that would be presented in a meaningful way, because we've also become aware of this sort of really increasing pressures of tourism. And so, of course, art is also often actually used as part of this sort of driver of quite unsustainable tourism as well, in particularly in these sort of environments or kind of remote locations and so on. So we really had to think of like, how do we, what is the kind of meaningful way, and where does the work that somehow actually showing the work on the island is not necessarily sustainable either, for the kind of, feeding certain kind of tourism, but then to really think of how we can maybe take some of these learnings from this place, and share those stories somewhere else for different audiences, for them to be able to engage with the questions about, for example, that changing ecology without having to travel there themselves. So there's different ways of thinking of like where and how our work circulates and what kind of value it can produce and for whom and who is it for. And then, for example, on the island, we've chosen to only really show work there that has a very kind of direct, close collaborative element with the science, because it's a way then for those visitors who do come there, for them to kind of gain some access and insight into the science that is being done that otherwise they don't really get to engage with very much. So this kind of constant navigation in a way and thinking of where and how our work actually circulates has been really, and I think here again the kind of island as a kind of microcosm that allows for that kind of a focus and allows for you to kind of go deeper and deeper and to have to kind of really think of your own practices in relation to that sort of specificity of the place, but then also all of those connections and flows and circulations that it is connected to in an ecological way, but also socially has been kind of, so in a way, it would be very difficult to do this kind of in-depth rethinking of your own practice and maybe also kind of for the place to be able to challenge our assumptions of how we operate in the arts, without actually really kind of getting stuck on one place and letting it really kind of, in a way, lead us and our work.
Great. Does anyone else want to pick that up? Or Jesse online? By the way, I saw a comment saying that the people would like to see the panel on the main screen, so feel free to stop sharing if it'll help us pop up.
Yeah, we'll try to.
All good? Okay, perfect answer in that case. Baiba, in that case, so is there any questions that came in online to do with kind of the residency experience itself or anything like that you'd like to pose?
Yeah, there were quite few sort of resonances of what also Taru and Jesse and rest of the panelists mentioned, and like even emphasizing the science parachute way of doing things. And for example, I can read out what one of the members are mentioning is doing science in a given place without taking into account local and traditional knowledge. We need more integrated approaches on many levels. Maybe I wonder if the panelists could also comment on that embedding into community setting and how, that work supports communities as well, which actually resonates with one other reflection, which is about, now I'm just reading it out loud. It says, I'm not an artist, I'm a PhD student in anthropology, investigating art and science, and I feel the pressure and outputs and deliverables at times can affect the qualitative research in a similar way that it affects artistic practice. So maybe that could be, if time could be, put a bit on this question about, not the parachutes type of artistic work and,
Yeah, maybe Jesse, do you want to elaborate? I think you kind of said something around that earlier in terms of that you guys give your residencies kind of the space and time that each specific project will need itself. I mean, they're all kind of individuals depending on what they're working on.
Yeah, again, I agree with everything that was said before. I think we also feel this residency fatigue, and we're also right now experiencing the impacts of tourism in the Azores. I don't like to villainize tourism because we're all tourists. We all move around. Edouard Glisson, he speaks a lot about this idea of like this circular nomadism, and that it's something that is embedded in our bodies, this necessity and this willingness to move and to discover people and places. So I don't want to villainize tourism, but at the same time, its development and the way that it penetrates territories happens in a very extractive way. That's of course unfortunately also happening in the Azores. So there's also between this residency fatigue as we as an institution become more professionalized and more dependent of these European grants or national grants from the Ministry of Culture in Portugal or even the regional government. There's always this pressure of what are the outcomes. forms? What are the deliverables, and what are these artists and people doing? Are they doing anything, or they just came? There's always these questions that are somehow they're challenging to answer and to mediate. And I think also going a little bit back, I think for us, we're also trying to understand that these projects, they're not only about art or exhibition making or creating this deliverable. There's also this insistent, or what I mean is like not thinking of art as an object or a discipline in itself. It's something way broader than that, and our insistence in this idea of the process, and also allowing the projects to drift. We also like a lot this idea of drifting, is extremely important sometimes for the project, and it will allow it to arrive to conclusions that maybe weren't defined in the goal or objective section of an application 3 years before. Because these projects and process, and then it becomes about it's life. It's a process of being, of doing together with other people, and the more time you have, and I also agree, time is something very relative. 3 months can be very short for an artist. It can be very long for another. It can be insignificant for research. It can be a lot for another. So I think we also need to look at these things, but at least to relativize it somehow, because it can change, it can shift a lot from one to another. But it's still a process. So it's understanding what it means to be and to do together. So it's something that is embedded in this day-to-day activities, in these relationships, and also in the ways that communities imagine or relate to each other. In our case as well, I think if at a given point we were very worried in like trying and forcing communities to be involved in these residencies and in these processes, I think now, also going back to what I was sharing with you guys before, I think we're trying not to force these deliverables, because I think participation can also be a form of delivering something, or of proving that the project worked or that it engaged, or I don't know. All of these things can be questionable, because it might make sense for one project or research, it might not to others. So I think it's also of understanding that sometimes these multiple communities, they'll have different ways of involving themselves in the projects, and other times you don't need to have that involvement. It's not about that. And I think we also need to acknowledge that, and to also be okay with that. There are certain projects or researches that are more, at least in a certain phase, there may be more individual, or there may be a bit more silent, or they might, develop in other ways. And then eventually, as it moves and as it goes into other stages, then it might become more open, or other people might. I think that's where we're like trying to understand now, of thinking of these things, of these residencies, of these processes as spaces of encounter, and also like just mediating and understanding in a very spontaneous, and you might direct sometimes, but allowing it to move and to enter into dialogue, but in other times to be in silence, and I think all these things are important to rehearse again, these forms of or these practices. So I don't know if I don't know if I'm answering exactly what you asked, but yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
That and more, Jesse. Thanks very much. Very interesting. So look at that, and just while I have all the panelists in a row, I'd just like to say, because we haven't yet, is welcome to Ireland, and I hope you have a lovely stay here. Thank you so much for giving us all your time today. It's been very generous, and it's been really, really interesting. So can we give them one more applause, and then we'll move to spotlighting some of your own art from the audience.